Episode 8 No Safe Place. Hello, my name is Ellen and I'd like to share with you the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. To this day I still have no satisfactory answer as to what happened to me when I was a child. What I do know is that this really did happen to me. I wonder if there's anyone else out there with a similar story. My story begins when I was around 6 or 7 years old. I was living with my mum and dad in a small apartment here in England. As far as I recall, life was pretty normal. I went to school, had nice friends, and did all the things a kid should be doing. Playing out in the woods in summer, and all that usual stuff. We weren't a rich family, but I don't ever remember that being an issue at that age. Other than our cramped apartment, that was. Around this time we came into some money. Well, property rather than money, I should say. My dad's father had died of a long-term cancer that autumn. He too wasn't rich, but did live in a detached 3-bed house not far from our apartment. My parents decided that it made sense that we move in there, as the mortgage was already paid, as opposed to paying rent on the smaller apartment. The plan was to then either renovate or sell on after a few months, if we found a house that we really wanted. We moved in towards the end of the year. I remember distinctly as the trees were losing their leaves, and it was starting to get colder and darker in the evenings. From the outside, the house was nothing special, although seemed like a palace compared to where we had been living. It was set at the end of a rather ordinary residential street, and backed onto a decent amount of woodland and farmland. Inside the house there was quite a bit of work needed. Nothing was really damaged or broken, it was simply old and hadn't been updated for years. You know, old wallpaper that seemed to have absorbed decades of the house's smell. The bathroom had very old fixtures in it, as did the kitchen. The staircase was wooden, but had one of those carpet runners along the middle of it. Overall, the place just gave me an unsettling feeling. I think it was because you could hear a few echoes and even smell a sort of dank history. It's hard to explain, but it just felt like we were living in someone else's house. It didn't feel like ours. Well, at least to me it didn't. It was the fact that all the beds, cabinets and fixtures were all still there from my grandfather. It's worth noting at this point I didn't get on well with my grandfather too well. He always seemed a bit mean-spirited on the times I had met him. Nothing too dramatic, he just didn't radiate kindness as most grandparents do. Again, it's hard to explain as it's just a feeling. He didn't seem too interested in me when I was younger. I think he just had other priorities. I hadn't seen him for quite some time. I understand now that it was because he was mostly bedridden due to his illness and didn't want visitors. I wasn't particularly upset at his passing, as we really didn't know each other too well. Shortly after we moved in was when unusual things started to happen around the house. I remember not liking to be on my own too much in the house. There was one occasion when Mum was in the kitchen preparing dinner one evening. I was in the living room building a small fort out of the sofa cushions and a blanket. I'd built the fort, crawled in and had thrown the blanket on top. It was very much like a small tent. I could just see a little bit from under the blanket on one side. This was when I first encountered something paranormal. I could clearly hear my mum in the kitchen. You know, the sounds of pots and pans clinking from time to time, and general activity from her. I became aware though of another person in the house. From the small opening where the blanket didn't quite meet the floor, there was also a distinct smell of tobacco. I could just see a set of black feet and lower legs, just standing in the doorway. Not black as in ethnicity, but black as in dark, charcoal-like in colour. Instantly I recoiled. I was really scared, as I knew it was just my mum and myself in the house. Dad was still on his way home after work. I stared in terror. I was very much just transfixed on why these mysterious legs were standing there and whose they could be. I curled up tighter in my makeshift fort for safety. All of a sudden, what I had most feared started to happen. The legs began to walk closer towards me. It was a sort of slow shuffle, to the point that they must have been within a few feet of me. They stood there for a second or two. This person clearly knew that I was in there. My mum then shouted, "Dinner!" I opened my eyes and the feet had gone. I burst out of the sofa fort expecting to confront the thing, but there was nobody there. Of course, I told my mum what I had seen straight away. She didn't seem to take it too seriously. I think that she assumed that it was all part of the fort building game that I'd been playing. I didn't see the legs again that day. The next encounter I had was a little less dramatic. It was perhaps only a week later that my mum asked me to go upstairs to get some towels down from the spare room. This is where we had been keeping a few random bits and bobs as we settled in. You know, when you move house, everyone has that one dumping ground room for stuff that doesn't have a place yet. I never liked that room. You had to go up the stairs and then off the wooden landing to the right. It was the only bedroom on that side of the landing. The room always seemed a bit cold, featureless and unloved. It just didn't feel like a home. It was bare apart from our moving boxes and a chest of drawers on the far side. I knew that the spare towels were in there. I very much didn't like being in there, so was just going to go in quickly, turn around and come out again as fast as I could. I reached into the drawer to get the towels. As I turned though, I swear that I saw a thin black arm appear from around the door. It seemed to be pulling itself around. Naturally I screamed, "Mum!" I think I also grabbed a hairbrush from the side and was ready to hit the thing if it came anywhere near me. The arm retreated just moments before my mum burst into the room. She had assumed that I had fallen or hurt myself. She appeared very panicked, as she could clearly see from my expression and general shaking that something had just happened to me. I was too scared to move, so she carried me downstairs. I closed my eyes all the way. Again, I thought I could smell an old tobacco smell, most likely from the old wallpaper and furnishings, but it seemed to become stronger as I closed my eyes. Again, I told her what I'd seen. She showed a lot more concern this time, as something had clearly happened. She calmed me down though and explained that it was just my imagination running away with me. It was a larger, older house that was yet to be modernised, and that my mind was playing tricks. The experience certainly seemed real though. After that, I did my best to understand that there was no imaginary man. However, in the coming weeks, I would regularly glimpse a dark figure out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes it would lurk in doorways, at other times it appeared to feel like it was hiding just out of sight on the upstairs landing. Of course, I have no proof for you whatsoever, just my word that it often felt like I was being watched. I didn't see the dark figure directly these times. It was more that I was aware that he was there, real or imagined. Things really started to escalate as time went on though. I had my own room at the house, next to my parents'. Nothing grand, just a mostly empty room with a bed. As I mentioned earlier, all of the fixtures such as the cabinets and beds came with the house. I started to have night terrors. I would wake to images of the dark figure in the corner of my room, just staring at me. I would pick up the courage to run to my parents' room and into their bed. This went on for weeks. Even though my parents would leave the light on all night, I was terrified to be on my own, and often imagined that I could hear steps outside on the landing. Each time, I would burst into my parents' room crying and shaking. It was a difficult time for my parents. My dad worked long hours to put food on the table, and my mum was also busy working 2 jobs to supplement the income. Neither were getting any sleep, and it was clear that I wasn't going to be able to sleep in my own room. For them, I think that there was a mix of frustration and concern. We all needed sleep at this point. Now, if this were a movie, I'm sure that it would be the perfect point to either get a priest in to bless the house or send me to a mental facility. Thankfully, my parents went for a much simpler solution. I begged them to let me sleep in their room. Finally, for all of our benefits, they agreed. My parents' room wasn't really wide enough for 2 beds, so my dad blew up an inflatable camping bed as a temporary solution. You know, those beds that smell of rubber and always seem to deflate slowly overnight. He placed it on the floor right next to their double bed and put blankets on it for me. I know this sounds silly, but I felt so much happier just having my parents close by, even if I was laying on the floor. That first night though is when I was scared for my very soul. I had gone up first with Mum. She fell asleep fairly quickly on the bed as I lay on the air mattress next to her. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. They were clearly my dad's, so I pretended to be asleep, as he quietly passed by my feet, took off his watch and got in the other side with Mum. Despite being tired and safe in my parents' room, I couldn't sleep. There was just a feeling that I wasn't safe. I turned over to watch the bedroom door. It was closed. Watching for some time in the darkness, I became more confident that it was indeed safe. That was until I turned over to face my parents' bed. Now remember, I was practically lying at floor level, so could see under my parents' bed very clearly. As I turned, I could see something under there in the darkness. To my horror, it appeared to be a black body. It was laying facing me just a couple of feet from my face. All of a sudden, it opened its bright white eyes with dark pupils and stared at me. I was pinned to my airbed in fear as its wide eyes stared and its hideous white teeth grinned at me. Slowly, it reached out a thin, dark arm towards me with a horrendous half wheeze, half growl. I screamed in terror, waking my parents instantly. I'm not sure what happened next, but I remember that the light was on and my mum was holding me tight. I think I was fairly unresponsive as she was trying to comfort me. Only a few minutes later downstairs, with all the lights on, could I tell her what I had seen. Dad had already gone back to bed. I remember feeling terrified for him being alone in that room. My parents never saw anything unusual in that house, at least not in the way that I did. Thankfully, they did decide to sell in the coming months. During that time, I had to sleep in my bed with Mum and the lights on. Dad slept alone in my parents' room until we moved out. In that time, I never went anywhere alone. Sometime later, I learnt that my parents' bed had been the bed that my grandfather had died in. Over a course of months, the lung cancer that had ravaged his body took his toll and he died in that room. To this day, the memories of that house still freak me out like I can't explain. I know that listening to this, it's easy to write this one off as an overactive imagination of a child or some sort of sleep disorder such as sleep paralysis. I know what I saw though, and I never want to go back in that house again. I'm sharing this story so anyone else with a similar experience can feel that you're not alone. If you enjoyed this week's paranormal story, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel for more tales of the supernatural and the unexplained. Until next time, my friends, happy hauntings.